Hello everyone, just a quick disclaimer before we get started. I don't claim that my builds are the best in the game, and I'm sure there are better ways to optimize some of them, but be aware that I do tend to get my builds at least endgame viable. This includes things like arbitration, steel path, Eidolon hunts, etc. Now that this is out of the way, these timestamps have been left here and in the description for your convenience. Feel free to skip around, but I'll start with the basics first just in case people don't know how to play this frame. So starting with the stats. Armor is 125 for prime, 100 for non-prime. A 25-point increase to the prime puts you at 29.4% damage reduction and 25% damage reduction, respectively. For energy, we have 150 for both. This puts you at 225 at max. For health, you're looking at a stock 100 for both. This puts you at 300 at max. For shield, you're looking at a 50-point increase going to the prime. This puts you at 450 shields for prime and 300 for non-prime. For sprint speed, you're looking at 1.1 for the prime and 1.0 for non-prime. The sprint speed doesn't exactly matter. The differences between the two are actually pretty negligible, but of course, if you can get the prime, go for it. In terms of acquisition, regular Trinity is obtained from the Ambulous boss fight on Pluto, while prime will be vaulted after the Prime Resurgence event that is currently happening. Moving on to the abilities, starting with the passive. Revive fallen allies 25% faster and from 50% farther away. Faster revives is always good, and being able to revive a bit farther away gives you a bit more options on positioning when going for a revive. Honestly, this passive isn't terribly strong, but definitely fits her as a support role. Moving on to her next ability, Well of Life. Create a Well of Life on an enemy. Allies will gain health when damaging the target. So you cast it on an enemy, and they get lifted into the air and are made invulnerable. The damage dealt to the target while this is active gets stored and dealt at the end of the duration. The ability can be released early by pressing the ability again. While the target is lifted, they give an aura in an area that replenishes health per second, as well as converting 1% of damage done to the target into health for allies within the area. In terms of modding for this ability, Drain is affected by ability efficiency, cast range and aura radius is affected by ability range, duration of the ability is affected by ability duration, and the health per second and lifesteal percentage is affected by ability strength. It's also worth mentioning this is Trinity's subsumed ability, when given to the Helminth. Moving on to Trinity's second ability, Energy Vampire. Allies will gain energy over time when enemies are marked with Energy Vampire. So you press 2 on an enemy, and they get a spell cast on them. This spell makes 4 pulses in the set duration that it is active. The pulse gives a set amount of energy to allies within range. If the target is killed before the ability ends, it will give all the energy at once. Each pulse does a certain percentage of damage to a target based on their current health. By default, the percentage is 25% at base strength, which is divided by 4 because of 4 pulses. Each pulse will do 6.25% of the target's current health, bypassing all armor as it is true damage. If the target is at or below 25% of its max health, the tick damage seems to scale in a way that ensures you'll still kill it with the energy pulse after a couple tries. In terms of modding for this ability, Drain is affected by ability efficiency, energy per pulse and damage dealt is affected by ability strength, cast range and pulse radius are affected by ability range, and the duration of how long or short the pulses take is affected by ability duration. Moving on to Trinity's third ability, Link. Any damage taken while Link is active will be channeled to a nearby enemy. So you press Link, and it links Trinity to 3 other targets in the area, reflecting incoming damage back to the linked targets. Targets can be linked through walls and obstacles. While active and at least one target is linked, Trinity receives a 75% damage reduction. While a target is linked, Trinity is status immune, including things like magnetic procs, heat, and even knockdowns and stagger effects. In terms of modding for this ability, Drain is affected by ability efficiency, Link range is affected by ability range, and duration is affected by ability duration. Moving on to Trinity's last ability, Blessing. Restore the health and shields of allies within Trinity's affinity aura while giving them some damage resistance. So you press 4 and everything within affinity range of Trinity will receive the heal and buff. Affinity range at base range is 50 meters and is seen in the top right near your team's health bars and will appear in your buffs if you are close enough to at least one other player. Affinity range can be modified by things like phosphors and cetus sold by Nakak, and even a passive from the Vazarin tree. The buff allies receive is damage reduction up to a maximum of 75% damage reduction. Additionally, they are healed for up to 100% of their total health and shields. This ability will heal defense targets for 500 health over 5 seconds and give 50% damage reduction, as they have a cap on how much damage reduction they can actually get. In terms of modding for this ability, Drain is affected by ability efficiency, duration of the damage reduction buff is affected by ability duration, restoration percent and damage reduction amount is affected by ability strength. So moving on to Trinity's Augments, starting with Pool of Life. Well of Life Augment: on death, marked enemies will drop 4 health orbs with a 25% chance of dropping an energy orb. This is a really good way to get a bunch of health orbs drops, and sometimes an energy orb. The energy orb drop chance is affected by strength. In all honesty, there's little to no reason to use Equilibrium on her, so I tend to avoid using this augment as she can already heal herself and others very easily. So moving on to her next ability augment, Vampire Leech. Energy Vampire Augment: excess energy replenishes shields by 150%. So energy conversion percent is not affected by strength. However, because the amount of energy given is affected by strength, it technically does affect it. So the higher the strength, the more energy you give, and in turn, gives you more shields. I've personally never had a reason to use this, since Blessing already resets Shield Gate, and shields aren't exactly that strong at higher levels unless we're strictly talking, Shield Gate builds. So I just typically don't bother with it. Moving on to her next augment, Abating Link. Link Augment reduces armor rating by 45% on enemies targeted by Link. So this is pretty straightforward. Link affects up to 3 enemies at a time, which means you can reduce a few targets at a time. It's affected by ability strength, so you can get a full strip with this, but you need quite a bit of strength to achieve this. It's a bit finicky in terms of which enemies get targeted by Link, but that's the nature of the ability, not the augment. Overall, it's okay to have a pocket armor strip around. Moving on to her last ability augment, Champion's Blessing. Blessing Augment: gain primary and secondary critical chance for 12 seconds for each percent you heal on allies up to 350%. So the buff is refreshable and stacks as long as you are casting it on the timer, which is good. The duration even scales off of ability duration, but I have a hard time liking this mod. Lately, people just build as glass cannons, so they are either dead or they are not, which has made it rather difficult to get this buff going in a meaningful amount of time without revolving the entire build around it, which I just don't like, so I won't be using it in builds. The buff doesn't even extend to allies at the moment, so I don't have any plans to use it. It's also worth noting this augment just came out and may be prone to changes as time goes on, so take what I say with a grain of salt. At this point in the video, I like to answer the question, is this frame steel path viable? Can it run arbitrations? Is it part of the Eidolon hunts? Trinity is one of the main warframes used in Eidolon hunts, being able to provide healing for the lures. In my honest opinion, the biggest problem she has is the lack of a decent looking skin. Able to be a super tank, energy giver, and health giver is pretty damn strong if you like support frames. So a quick disclaimer before we get into things. I use an Umbra form on my Trinity because of the way my builds are set up. I have multiple builds using different polarities. Unfortunately, there is no way around this except to just not use the Umbral mods, but this brings the effectiveness down by quite a bit. I'll be giving non-Umbral versions that are compatible to have one added later, just so that you can get her going till you can get your hands on an Umbra forma. Going into the build, we have my support tank build. This build is designed to be the best possible support, while also being able to be incredibly tanky. In terms of helmet, you're going to want Roar. Other options work, but the point of the build is to be support, and we can give a 75% Roar to our allies with this, of course when we proc Growing Power first, and this just can definitely help. In terms of forma, you're looking at 5 forma. You'll add a Materite to the aura, or an aura forma if you want to use my other builds. Additionally, you'll add an Umbra forma, 2 Nariman, and a Materite. You'll replace all the default Vazarin. I use an Umbra forma for the same reason I mentioned in the disclaimer. If you can't do this, here's the build you'll do instead. Just bear in mind it's much weaker without the Umbra forma, and you'll need to proc Growing Power before using Link to get the full armor strip. Going over the mods, starting with the aura, we are using Growing Power. The reason why we do this is because it's a good way to give your team extra strength. Again, this is a support build. It's always good to have extra strength. Everybody likes it. Of course, they need to proc a status effect to get it, but it's fairly easy to do nowadays. When we're using this with Roar, we actually get a 75% increase, which is also pretty nice. Next, we have Umbra Vitality and Umbra Intensify, which are boosting each other for extra health and strength. We're going to need to hit 223% strength for Abating Link to work, because we want it to be 100% armor strip. So we need to hit that amount to be able to hit it, and of course, we're definitely hitting it, especially if we have growing power active. That, of course, brings us to baiting Link. We just want an armor strip kind of whenever is available. It's pretty good. Next, we have Transient Fortitude to bring up our ability strength a whole bunch. Unfortunately, this brings down our duration a bit. This is a type of build that really wants a good amount of duration, but the problem is we just can't fit it. We're trying to get way too many stats from one build, and this is obviously just kind of one of the things that we can't get a whole lot of. If you wanted to, you could replace Reach with something like Constitution, but I will tell you soon why I don't prefer to do that. Next, we have Prime Continuity here, because obviously we need that duration as much as we can. Blessing in Link. I mean, fortunately, we're able to spam this because we have constant energy back, but it's still pretty annoying that we have to constantly hit it. So this just pretty much helps with that. Next, we have Stretch and Reach. The reason why we want so much range here is because we want our Energy Vampire. If we're going to be spamming this a lot, we might as well be giving it to as many people as possible in our squad. Additionally, Link has a decent range to start, so of course putting this on top of it really does help. Lastly, we have Prime Flow, because obviously if we're going to be spamming 4, 3, 1, pretty much on cooldown, we're obviously going to want to be able to bank a ton of energy from our second ability. Lastly, we have Power Drift, so we just wanted to push, a little bit of extra strength to get that full armor strip with Link, not counting growing power. In terms of Arcanes, you'll want Guardian for the extra armor, which of course in turn gives extra damage reduction. Anything else is just a bonus. I was using Free here for the last thing I was doing. It's totally, you can just run whatever. In terms of misc requirements, I would say having a weapon that can proc a bunch of stats for growing power is ideal. Personally, I chose to give my Sentinel a weapon that just deals a ton of status and even does a good amount of damage. This way, I always have growing power active on myself without even having to try. In terms of Operator School, I would say Vazarin is a good pick here, as it complements our role as a support very well. Instant revives, being able to give brief invulnerability, shielding targets, and also increasing our affinity range for our Bless is all incredibly beneficial as a support role. So a quick how to use. It's pretty simple, honestly. You press 2 whenever you can. This gives you and your teammates plenty of juice to keep going. You'll be needing a lot to keep your buff actives, which gives you more incentive to spam it for your teammates. Once you press 2 on an enemy, press 3 to make 3 nearby enemies get armor stripped. This will help you eliminate the targets with Energy Vampire on them. From here, you kill them and press 4 to give more damage reduction, and heals any damage that may have been done to you so far. Then you press 1 if you're using Roar, as this gives a bunch of damage to the group. And that's pretty much it. You just keep all your buffs up constantly and make sure you're giving energy enough to sustain yourself and other people. Now I'm going to go and do some gameplay to show how I actually use it in a survival in Steel Path. So here we have an Acolyte spawn, and once the link goes onto them, of course it's on the people behind me, but as soon as it goes onto them, it makes very quick work of them. Just getting rid of all that armor makes targets so much easier to deal with. And then right here, I just go through all my rotation, getting all my abilities active, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Going into my next build, which is my Energy Vampire build. This build is designed to be an easy Energy Vampire spammer for things like Sanctuary Onslaught groups. If you want a more advanced EV build that's considerably more expensive but more reliable, head to the next build. In terms of Helminth, you're going to want, nothing. But if you do have access to Helminth, I suggest Voracious Metastasis to give your group occasional extra energy when you can't find enemies and have extra energy. Or even Dispensary, but at that point, I would just recommend my next build. In terms of Forma, you're looking at 6 Forma. You'll add a Nariman to the aura for corrosive projection, or Matarai if you'd prefer a group using Power Donation. Personally, I recommend an Ore Forma as it makes it compatible with my other builds as well. Additionally, you'll add an Umbra Forma, 2 Nariman, and a Matarai. You replace all the default Vazarin. Lastly, add a Zenuric to the Exilus. I use an Umbra Forma for the same reason I mentioned in the disclaimer. If you can't do this, here's the build you'll do instead. Just bear in mind it's fairly weaker without the Umbra Forma. So going over the mods, starting with the aura. So corrosive projection. So obviously when we're dealing with like a lot of like mid-tier level armor, corrosive projection is a pretty good damage boost if everyone's running it. Obviously armor is a pretty big issue in this game, and if everyone's doing it on a bigger scale, obviously that helps a lot. Alternatively, if everyone's running power donation here, that is also an incredibly good option. Next, we have Umbra Vitality and Intensify to boost each other. We just want to be able to, not get one shot, which is why we have Vitality. And of course, we need a whole bunch of Strength, so we're giving more energy per pulse for Energy Vampire. Next, we have Overextended, because we just want to be able to cover as much range with Energy Vampire as we can. We're covering a 58 meter radius, closer to 59. That is pretty solid. Next, we have Transient Fortitude. This brings down our duration a bunch. This is actually not a problem, which I'll get into soon. And of course, brings up our strength a ton, as well as Blind Rage brings up our strength a ton, brings down our efficiency. Not a huge issue when we're only pushing one button, which gives us our energy back. Next, we have Stretch, because we want to be able to hit, of course, as much range as we can. Flow, it helps to have a bunch of extra energy just in case we get drained from something that we can't see or whatever the case is, and it also pairs incredibly well if you have something like Voracious Metastasis. Next, we have Fleeting Expertise. This brings our efficiency up. We're not actually using this for efficiency. We're using this for the minus duration. We want our ticks on Energy Vampire to go as quickly as possible, and they definitely are. We're getting 4 ticks in 1.13 seconds. That is pretty good. Lastly, we have Power Drift, so we can just get as much, we're just trying to push that strength as much as possible. We're getting 66 energy per pulse, so times 4 is 264 energy. Moving on to the Arcanes, I would recommend Guardian and Energize, but honestly, if you have Energize and even the Dispensary Subsume, go to my next build. Guardian will help beef us up a bit in higher levels, and Energize can occasionally give our allies in the area energy if it procs. Going into the Operator School, I would say Vazarin is probably best because the instant revives make a huge difference, especially in something like Sanctuary Onslaught, where someone being down for a while after going through a portal tends to cost a group a lot of focus. I'm not going to go over a how to use for this because all you do is press 2 on enemies. Moving right along. Going on to the next build, which is literally just a variation of the previous. This build is designed to give a bunch of energy to your team, specifically for Sanctuary Onslaught. Fair warning that this is a pricey version of my previous build, which does in fact do better when your groups are actually good in killing things before the Trinity gets a chance to give energy. The reason it's pricey is because it takes Arcane Energize and the Dispensary Subsume. And of course, that brings us into the Helminth ability. We're going to want Dispensary because whenever an energy orb comes up from it, we have a chance of proccing Arcane Energize for our team, which is a bunch of energy. Not to mention our allies get the energy drops from the Dispensary itself too. We do this because some groups just kill things way faster than a Trinity can track a new target to give energy on. In terms of Forma, you're looking at 6 Forma. You'll add a Nariman to the aura for corrosive projection, or Matarai if you'd prefer a group using power donation. Personally, I recommend an Ore Forma as it makes it compatible with my other builds as well. Additionally, you'll add an Umbra Forma, 2 Nariman, and a Matarai. You replace all the default Vazarin. Lastly, add a Zenuric to the Exilis. So going over the mods, starting with Aura. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we have an option between Corrosive Projection and Power Donation. The reason being is because, obviously, Corrosive Projection in mid-level content is really good against armor. It gets rid of most of the armor that's actually causing most of the damage reduction on enemies. But of course, Power Donation, if everyone's running that as well, is incredibly strong. Moving on to the next mod, we have Umbrella Intensify. We're not pairing this with Vitality because I frankly couldn't fit it. However, if you're this far where you can afford an Energize and a Subsume on Dispensary, I would hope that you can probably manage without the health. Going into the next mod, we have Prime Continuity. The reason why we want Duration here is because, of course, Blessing and Link both go off of that. We're not using health, so it helps to have the damage reduction. But most importantly, Dispensary. The longer we have Dispensary up, the better. We're getting our Energized procs from here, which obviously in turn give our team extra energy. Next, we have Overextended because, of course, we want to be able to hit a decent range with our Energy Vampire. Next, we have Transient Fortitude. Brings down our duration. Sucks a little. It is what it is. But, of course, this gives us ability Strength, which is pretty important. We have Blind Rage here as well, which is giving us ability Strength, which is also pretty important. It brings down our efficiency, but we're giving ourselves energy. This is the point of the build. This isn't a huge issue. Next, we have Stretch. Again, we're just trying to push our range as much as we possibly can. Next, we have Streamline. This is an option slot. If you're comfortable, you could actually put like a duration mod here or something if you really wanted to. It's not a huge deal. This is definitely an option slot. Prime Flow. This is also kind of an option slot. However, I would say this is a bit more mandatory than Streamline because we do want to be able to have some extra energy to be able to hit our Blessing and our Link quite frequently, as this is going to keep us and our group alive. Lastly, we have Power Drift here. Of course, we just want to push the extra strength as much as we can, and that is pretty much how that goes. In terms of Arcanes, as mentioned earlier, Energize is mandatory for this, paired with Dispensary. Everything else is just a bonus. Moving into the Operator School, I am using Vazarin, and I would say Vazarin is probably best because the instant revives make a huge difference, especially in something like Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, where someone being down for a while after going through a portal tends to cost the group a lot of focus. So a quick how to use. You press 2 on an enemy, and then you press 1. Occasionally hit 4 if you see your allies lose a bunch of health. From here, you just keep on spamming 2 as people need energy. Okay, moving on to my next build, which is my Nuke build. This build is designed to give energy back to us while we also spam another ability to kill everything. In terms of helmet, you're going to want Thermal Sunder. This will be the primary nuking tool that we use. In terms of Forma, you're looking at 5 Forma. You'll add an Airman to the Aura, or an Aura Forma if you want to use my other builds. Additionally, you'll add an Umbra Forma, 2 Nariman, and a Matter-Eye. You'll replace all the default Vazarin. I use an Umbra Forma for the same reason I mentioned in the disclaimer. If you can't do this, here's the build you'll do instead, just bear in mind it's a bit weaker. Going over the mods, starting with the Aura. We have enemy radar because we just want to know where the enemies are. We're going to be nuking things, so it's good to know when we should actually be hitting our nuke, and not just hitting it hoping we hit something. Going on to the next one, we have Umbral Intensify. We're not pairing this with Vitality, we don't really need it. Everything's going to be dying. This is geared for lower level things. I would say it works up until about level 60 probably, maybe more. Something like that. So we have Stretch and Overextended paired together for as much range as we can fit on this build without sacrificing too many other stats. So obviously Overextended sacrifices some strength, but that is okay. We are using Blind Rage and Transient Fortitude here to get all that strength back on top of course, Umbral Intensify. The minus efficiency doesn't really matter too much because again, we're Trinity. We're getting energy back anyway. And Transient Fortitude, well, we don't really need duration. So, the faster we're getting our energy back, the better. Next, we have Prime Flow, just so we can bank a ton of energy. We want to be spamming a lot, so this is a good way to enable us to do that. And then we have Fleeting Expertise to bring down the duration even more. Because, again, we really don't need the duration. The faster we're getting energy, the better. And this also benefits us by giving us some extra efficiency, which obviously can help with a spammy build like this. Paired with that, we have Streamline. Because, yeah, I mean, it's good to have the extra efficiency when we're going to be constantly using abilities. Lastly, we have Power Drift because I just wanted to push the strength a little bit further as much as I possibly could. Going over the Arcanes, you can do whatever here. I personally run Nullifier so I don't get drained from magnetic procs. I also run Guardian for a little extra tank, even though we don't use Vitality here. In terms of Operator School, I would say anything is fine. Zenura can help you if you accidentally spam your nuke too hard and forget to give yourself energy. So a quick how to use, you press 2 and spam 1 until things die. You can hold it for fire and tap it for cold damage, and you combine the 2 for blast. If you want an in-depth tutorial on this ability, head to my Gauss guide. And don't forget to press 2 whenever you're low on energy, and that is literally it. I'm not going to go into gameplay for this because of how simple it is. You guys get the point. Going into my last build, this build is designed as the ultimate support for Eidolon hunts. Typically, the Trinity gets the lures and has to babysit them during a hunt, so that's exactly what this build is designed around. In terms of helmet, you're going to want Dispensary. I use Dispensary because it can help give your team occasional energy, but more importantly, it can give your Necromech energy, which tends to do the most damage in hunts nowadays anyway. You can't actually get energy from other sources while in Necromech, so this is the go-to to just spawn the orbs. In terms of Forma, you're looking at 6 Forma. You'll add a Nariman to the Aura for enemy radar, or Matter-Eye if your group is using snipers for Deadeye. Personally, I recommend using an Aura Forma, as it makes it compatible with my other builds as well. Additionally, you'll add an Umbra Forma, 2 Nariman, and a Matter-Eye. You'll replace all the default Vazarin. Lastly, add a Zenuric to the Exilus. I use an Umbra Forma for the same reason I mentioned in the disclaimer. If you can't do this, here's a build you'll do instead. Just bear in mind it's a bit weaker without the Umbra Forma. So going over the mods, starting with the Aura. Obviously, I use enemy radar here. This just helps a bit because we don't need the extra damage. I like to know where all the VOMs are on the map. If everyone's running this, you can see VOMs on the other side of the map. It's absolutely fantastic. If you do need the extra damage, however, say your group is still using snipers, I would use Deadeye. Going over the rest of the mods, we have Umbral Vitality and Intensify. We just want a bit of tankiness and, of course, some strength, so we are getting the full damage reduction. Next, we have Narrow-Minded, so we can get us a bunch of duration. We want our damage reduction buff to last as long as possible, and of course, this also doubles for Dispensary, lasting a lot longer. Next, we have Prime Continuity for, again, duration. And the reason why the negative range doesn't matter on Narrow-Minded is, of course, because Blessing goes off of the affinity range. Next, we have Hunter Adrenaline here. We're going to be taking a lot of hits typically throughout the fight, specifically in the second and third Eidolon, so that, of course, will help quite a bit with our sustain. Typically, though, you're going to be spamming pads anyway, so just get used to it. Next, we have Prime Flow, so we can bank a ton of energy. Next, we have Constitution for, again, more duration, and then this also doubles for giving us some faster knockdown recovery. And then we have Streamline. We're going to be spamming Blessing and Dispensary quite a bit. It's good to bring those costs down. Moving into the Arcanes, I prefer Arcane Nullifier and Guardian. Nullifier may not be needed depending on who's in the group, but Guardian can definitely give you extra tankiness. In terms of Operator School, it depends what the rest of your group is doing, but I would say helping to damage shields with Matter Eye or giving an RO Wisp with an RO is a good bet. If you're doing an RO, maybe also consider taking care of loose Vombalists. I'm not going to go into gameplay for this build because it's pretty straightforward on how to use it if you know what you're supposed to be doing in the fight. This isn't a guide on how to do Eidolons, but all you need to know is to be hitting 4 whenever big damage comes towards the lures, and keeping Dispensary up. Anything within your affinity range will get the damage reduction buff, so try to keep it active often. So that is the complete Trinity guide. She's an incredibly good support, and I can definitely recommend her. If you enjoyed the video, or it helped in any way, please leave a like. And if you're looking forward to future content like this, subscribe and stay tuned. If I missed anything, or you'd like to leave some feedback, leave it down in the comments. I appreciate all the support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.